The galaxy had seen many armies march across the stars. The Zephyrians with their crystalline exoskeletons that could deflect plasma fire. The Vorthax swarms that moved like living storms across worlds. The mechanical precision of the Synthoid legions that calculated every move 3 steps ahead. Each species brought their own terror to the battlefield, their own way of breaking enemies and claiming territory. But none of them understood what they were truly facing when humanity finally stepped onto the galactic stage. Commander Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the view screen display the massive alien fleet that had just dropped out of hyperspace. 47 ships, each one the size of a city block, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. The hegemony had come to deliver their ultimatum to Earth's newest colony on Kepler, 442b. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission," reported Lieutenant Martinez from the communication station. "Put it through." The screen flickered, revealing a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a spider, its 4 eyes glowing with an unsettling purple light. When it spoke, the universal translator rendered its clicking mandibles into cold, mechanical words. "I am Warlord Thexkar of the Hegemony Third Fleet. You will evacuate this world within 1 solar cycle and return to your primitive homeworld. This sector belongs to the Hegemony. Comply or be exterminated." Sarah looked at the alien warlord for a long moment, then glanced around her bridge. 23 crew members, mostly young people who had never seen real combat. Her ship was a modified cargo hauler with some military-grade shields and a handful of torpedo tubes. Against the alien armada, it was like bringing a knife to a nuclear war. She should have been terrified. Any rational being would have been. Instead, she smiled. "Warlord Thexkar," she said, her voice carrying the easy confidence that had gotten her through 3 colonial uprisings and the Titan Rebellion. "I appreciate the warning, but I'm afraid we can't accommodate your request. You see, there are 40,000 human civilians down on that planet. Farmers, teachers, children. They've built homes, planted crops, started lives. And we don't abandon our people." The alien's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Your bravado is noted, human. But you face the might of the hegemony. We have conquered 17 star systems. Our warriors are bred for battle, genetically enhanced for combat. What do you have? 1 small ship?" Sarah's smile widened. "Oh, we have much more than that." She nodded to Martinez, who began transmitting a coded signal into deep space. For several seconds, nothing happened. The alien fleet maintained its threatening formation, weapons charging with an ominous glow. Then, space began to ripple. The first human ship that emerged from hyperspace was the UES Retribution, a heavy cruiser that dwarfed Sarah's vessel. But it wasn't alone. Ships kept appearing, destroyers, frigates, carriers, each one sliding into formation with the kind of precision that spoke of countless hours of drill and training. But the hegemony had seen large fleets before. What they hadn't seen was what came next. From the edge of the system, moving at sublight speeds, but closing fast, came something that defied their understanding of naval warfare. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a mobile city, a massive construct of metal and ceramic that stretched for kilometers. Docking bays the size of football stadiums. Manufacturing centers that could build new ships even while in combat. Weapon arrays that could level continents. It was humanity's newest creation, the UES Avalanche, their first true battle fortress. "Impossible," Thexkar whispered, his translated voice carrying genuine shock. "No species builds ships that large. The resource cost alone would bankrupt a star system." "You're thinking like a civilization that fights wars," Sarah replied, her voice carrying across the open channel, so both fleets could hear. "We don't fight wars, Warlord. We end them." The truth was, humans had learned something during their centuries of conflict on Earth, something that most alien species had never grasped. War wasn't about having the biggest gun or the strongest armor. War was about logistics, adaptation, and the willingness to do whatever it took to protect what mattered. While other species bred warriors, humans bred soldiers. The difference was crucial. A warrior fought for glory, for honor, for the thrill of battle. A soldier fought for the person standing next to them, for the people back home, for an idea that was bigger than themselves. Warriors could be magnificent in single combat, but soldiers won wars. And humanity had been turning warfare into a science for millennia. The hegemony ships began to spread out, try to use their superior numbers to encircle the human fleet. It was a sound tactical decision based on standard galactic naval doctrine. Thexkar had used similar formations to crush the resistance at Proxima Centauri and break the Rigelian defense fleet. But as his ships moved into position, something strange began to happen. The human fleet didn't respond the way he expected. Instead of forming a defensive sphere or attempting to break through his line, they simply waited. "Sir," one of his subordinates reported, "the humans appear to be doing nothing." Thexkar studied the tactical display, his four eyes narrowing. In his experience, there were only two reasons an enemy didn't react to an obvious tactical maneuver. Either they were incompetent, or they knew something he didn't. Given the humans had managed to build that massive fortress ship, incompetence seemed unlikely. "All ships, maintain formation, but hold fire," he ordered. "Continue scans. I want to know what they're planning." The answer came from an unexpected direction. Deep space sensors began detecting movement from the outer system. Not ships, but something else. Asteroids were shifting from their normal orbits, adjusting course with subtle thruster burns that had been hidden among their rocky surfaces. Not asteroids, weapons platforms. Hundreds of them, disguised as space debris, positioned throughout the system over months or even years. Each one was now revealing itself, unfolding weapon arrays, and targeting systems that had been dormant until this moment. By the void, Thexkar breathed, realizing the trap he had flown into. The humans hadn't just brought a fleet to this battle. They had turned the entire star system into a weapon. But even that wasn't the end of it. From the planet's surface, massive railguns that had been built into mountain ranges began to track his ships. Not the crude planetary defense weapons he was familiar with, but precision instruments that could hit a target the size of a fighter craft at interplanetary ranges. And from the asteroid belt, something even more disturbing began to emerge. Mining ships, hundreds of them, but modified. Their industrial lasers and excavation equipment had been converted into weapons of war. Their cargo holds filled not with ore, but with swarms of automated defense drones. Sarah Chun watched the alien formation falter as they realized the scope of what they faced. This wasn't a naval battle. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign that had been planned for months, with every contingency accounted for and every advantage exploited. "You see, Warlord," she said, her voice calm despite the tension crackling through both fleets. "When you threaten our people, you're not just threatening our military. You're threatening our farmers, our miners, our engineers, our children. And we've learned something over the centuries that you might want to consider." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the channel. "We don't have warriors. We don't have soldiers. When you threaten our people, you don't face an army. You face an entire civilization that has decided you need to stop existing." The hegemony fleet hung in space, surrounded, outgunned, and completely outmaneuvered by an enemy they had dismissed as primitives. For the first time in the history of their expansion, they faced opponents who had turned the very concept of warfare into something beyond their understanding. And in that moment, as Warlord Thexkar stared at his tactical display, showing threat markers in every direction, the galaxy began to learn what humans really meant when they said they would defend their own. The lesson was about to become very educational. The silence stretched across space like a hell breath. 47 hegemony warships sat motionless in the void, their crews staring at sensor readings that told them they were surrounded by an impossible number of threats. Every tactical computer on every ship was displaying the same message: escape probability 0%. Warlord Thexkar's bridge had become a tomb of clicking mandibles and nervous chittering. His tactical officer, a seasoned veteran of 12 conquest campaigns, looked up from his console with four eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir, I'm reading over 300 independent targeting sources. The asteroid field has been completely militarized. Those mining ships, their industrial equipment has been retrofitted into siege weapons. And the planet. He paused, checking his readings twice. Sir, the entire planet has been turned into a fortress. Every mountain range is hiding artillery. Every orbital platform is armed. Fexcar studied the tactical display, his predator's mind trying to find some weakness, some flaw in the human strategy he could exploit. There had to be something. In 17 previous conquests, there had always been something. Weapon status? He asked. All ships ready to engage, but sir, the weapons officer hesitated. If we open fire, they can hit us from every angle. We'll be destroyed within minutes. And if we attempt to withdraw? The navigation officer answered without looking up from his instruments. They have FTL inhibitor fields active. We can't jump out. And their long-range platforms can track us to the edge of the system. For the first time in his career, Fexcar felt something he had never experienced before in combat. Complete tactical helplessness. The humans had created a scenario where his superior firepower, his numerical advantage in ships, his genetically enhanced warriors, none of it mattered. They had turned the battlefield itself into their ally. But what disturbed him even more was the realization that this level of preparation couldn't have been arranged in the few days since the hegemony had declared their intention to take this system. This had been planned for months, possibly years, which meant the humans had been expecting them. Sir, the communications officer reported, we're receiving another transmission from the human commander. Put it through. Sarah Chen's face appeared on the main screen again, but now she wasn't alone. The bridge around her showed the controlled chaos of a military command center in full operation. Officers moved with purpose, data streams flowed across multiple displays, and, in the background, he could see feeds from across the system showing the massive coordination of their defense network. Warlord Fexcar, she said, her voice carrying a note of what might have been sympathy. I imagine your tactical situation looks rather challenging right about now. What do you want, human? He snarled, his mandibles clicking with frustration. I want you to understand something, she replied, leaning forward slightly. Your intelligence reports told you that humans are a young species, that we've only been in space for a few centuries. That's true, but what your reports didn't tell you is what we did with those centuries. She gestured, and the screen split to show images from across the human fleet. But these weren't the crisp, sterile images of military propaganda. These were working ships with crews that looked too young or too old for military service. Mining equipment converted to weapons. Cargo haulers fitted with armor plating. Transport ships carrying fighters that looked like they'd been built in garage workshops. You see professional soldiers and think we're like you, Sarah continued. But look closer. That mining ship captain? She's a grandmother from the Australian colonies who's been moving asteroids for 30 years. She knows how to crack open a mountain with surgical precision. Those fighter pilots? Most of them are teenagers who've been flying since they could reach the controls. They know their ships like you know your own body. The display shifted again, showing the fortress ship UES Avalanche. But now the images revealed its true nature. It wasn't just a military vessel. It was a mobile civilization. Residential decks where families lived. Schools where children learned. Factories where civilians worked alongside military personnel to produce everything from ammunition to medical supplies. We don't have a military separate from our people, Sarah explained. We are our military. When you threaten a human colony, you're not threatening soldiers. You're threatening farmers who know how to operate heavy machinery that can be converted to artillery. Teachers who understand chemistry well enough to manufacture explosives. Engineers who can turn a children's playground into a missile defense system. Fexcar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton as the implications sank in. Most species maintained clear distinctions between their military and civilian populations. Warriors were bred and trained for combat while civilians handled production and support roles. It was efficient, specialized, and followed the natural order that had evolved on thousands of worlds. But humans had done something different. They had created a civilization where the line between soldier and civilian didn't exist. Impossible, he whispered. Such a system would be chaotic, inefficient. No centralized command structure could coordinate. Who said anything about centralized command? Sarah interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Every human settlement is semi-autonomous. Every ship captain has tactical authority in their area of operations. Every work crew knows how to function as a military unit. We don't need centralized command because we've trained our entire population to think tactically. She gestured again, and the display showed dozens of smaller engagements happening throughout human space. Mining operations that had converted to combat roles within hours. Civilian transports coordinating to form impromptu supply lines. Research stations that had revealed hidden weapon systems. While you were preparing to attack one human colony, Warlord, every human settlement in this sector was preparing to defend it. That cargo convoy that passed through your space last month? They were mapping your patrol routes and weapon signatures. The research expedition that requested safe passage. They were placing monitoring stations throughout your territory. The diplomatic mission that visited your homeworld? They were teaching your own people about human culture. The blood drained from Thexgar's face as he understood what she was telling him. I'm saying that while you were planning to conquer us, we were figuring out how to defeat you without firing a shot. Sarah's expression became almost gentle. Your own intelligence networks have been compromised for months. Half your fleet movements have been predicted and countered before you even gave the orders. And right now, there are human civilians throughout hegemony space who are ready to begin what we call asymmetric resistance operations. The tactical display on Thexgar's bridge suddenly lit up with new contacts. Ships were emerging from hyperspace throughout the system, but these weren't military vessels. They were civilian craft of every description. Merchant ships, passenger liners, research vessels, even what looked like converted luxury yachts. But as they moved into formation, it became clear that each one had been modified for combat. The passenger liner deployed fighter squadrons from converted cargo bays. The research vessel's sensor arrays revealed themselves to be targeting systems for weapons that had been hidden in scientific equipment housings. The merchant ships opened their holds to release clouds of automated defensive drones. You see, Warlord, Sarah said as hundreds of additional human vessels took position throughout the system. We learned something from our history that you never had to. We learned that the most dangerous army isn't one made up of professional soldiers. It's one made up of ordinary people who have decided they have something worth fighting for. The merchant ship UES Free Trader moved into position off Thexgar's starboard flank. Through the viewport, he could see its bridge crew, a man who looked like a farmer, a woman who might have been a teacher, and what appeared to be a teenage girl operating the weapons console with the casual expertise of someone who had been doing it her entire life. The girl, he said, his voice barely audible. She's a child. She's 15, Sarah confirmed. Born on a transport ship, raised in zero gravity. She's been flying since she was 7 and managing cargo operations since she was 12. She knows more about three-dimensional tactical maneuvering than most of your fleet commanders. And she's not unusual. She's what human children become when they grow up, knowing that sometimes you have to fight for what you believe in. Across the hegemony fleet, similar realizations were dawning. These weren't professional military units they were facing. This was an entire civilization that had organized itself around the principle that every citizen was responsible for defense. Every child learned to think tactically. Every adult knew how to convert civilian tools into weapons. Every elderly person understood logistics and supply chains. The humans hadn't just brought an army to this battle. They had brought their entire way of life and transformed it into something the galaxy had never seen before. A civilization that was itself a weapon. What happens now? Thexgar asked quietly. Sarah's expression softened slightly. That depends on you, Warlord. You came here expecting to find victims. Instead, you found people who refuse to be victims. You can choose to learn from that, or you can choose to force us to teach the lesson in a more permanent way. Around them, the human fleet waited with the patience of people who had nowhere else to go and nothing more important to do. They weren't eager for battle, but they weren't afraid of it either. They were simply ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in his military career, Warlord Thexkar found himself wondering if surrender might be the wisest tactical option available. The moment stretched into eternity as two fundamentally different philosophies of warfare faced each other across the void. In the command center of the UES Avalanche, Admiral Rebecca Torres watched her displays with the calm satisfaction of someone whose plans were unfolding exactly as predicted. Unlike Commander Chun, who had the luxury of dramatic gestures and philosophical speeches, Torres had spent the last 6 months orchestrating the largest deception operation in human history. While the hegemony had been planning their invasion, she had been preparing for something far more ambitious: the complete restructuring of how the galaxy thought about conflict. "Admiral," reported Captain Liu from the intelligence station, "we're receiving confirmation from deep space. Operation Shepherd's Gambit is in position and ready to proceed." Torres nodded, her weathered face showing no emotion. She had fought in the Martian Independence War, survived the siege of Europa, and commanded the defense of the outer colonies during the Pirate Wars. She understood something that most species in the galaxy had never learned. War was not about destroying your enemy. War was about making your enemy understand that destroying you was impossible. "Signal all units," she ordered. "Initiate Phase 2. Throughout the system, human ships began to move with a coordination that defied everything the hegemony knew about fleet operations. But this wasn't the rigid, hierarchical movement of a traditional navy. This was something organic, adaptive, like watching a flock of birds or a school of fish respond to changes in their environment. The mining vessel Broken Hammer, operated by a crew of former asteroid miners from the belt, suddenly accelerated toward the hegemony formation. But instead of attacking, it began deploying something that looked like industrial equipment. Massive magnetic nets designed for capturing metallic asteroids spread out between the alien ships. The converted cargo hauler New Horizon simultaneously launched what appeared to be standard shipping containers. But as they drifted toward the hegemony fleet, the containers began to unfold, revealing sophisticated jamming equipment that immediately began disrupting alien communications and targeting systems. Within minutes, Warlord Thexkar found his fleet blind and isolated. Ship-to-ship communication was reduced to short-range optical signals. Long-range sensors were uselessly cluttered with false contacts and electronic noise. Most disturbing of all, his ship's targeting computers could no longer distinguish between real threats and decoys. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission on an emergency frequency. It's coming from inside our own fleet." "Impossible." "Sir, the signal is originating from the heavy cruiser Vengeance's Dawn." Thexkar felt his blood freeze. The Vengeance's Dawn was his flagship's sister ship, commanded by his own brother, Subwarlord Kethvar. The idea that humans had somehow compromised a hegemony capital ship was beyond comprehension. Put it through. The face that appeared on the screen was unmistakably hegemony. 4 eyes, chitinous features, the proud bearing of a noble warrior. But something was wrong. Subwarlord Kethvar looked different. His eyes held an expression that Thexkar had never seen before: uncertainty. "Brother," Kethvar said in their native language, "we need to talk. What is the meaning of this? Why are you transmitting on human frequencies?" "Because," Kethvar replied slowly, "I think we may have made a mistake." The screen split, and Admiral Torres appeared alongside the hegemony officer. The human woman's expression was professionally neutral, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was enjoying herself. "Warlord Thexkar," she said formally, "I'd like to introduce you to Subwarlord Kethvar. For the past several hours, he's been our guest aboard the UES Subtle Knife. Impossible Ikar Snorth. My brother commands the Vengeance's Dawn." "No human ship could have..." "Actually," Torres interrupted gently, "the Vengeance's Dawn has been under human control for the past 48 hours. We've been broadcasting false identification signals to maintain the illusion that it was still part of your fleet. Your brother and his crew are safe and well-treated aboard our ship, which has been paralleling the Vengeance's Dawn's course since we captured it. The implications hit Thexkar like a physical blow. If the humans had taken one of his ships without him even knowing it was missing, then everything he thought he understood about this engagement was wrong. How, he whispered. Kethvar answered, his voice carrying an emotion that no hegemony warrior should ever express. Admiration. Brother, they didn't attack us. They didn't even threaten us. They convinced us. Torres nodded. Your brother's ship responded to a distress call from what appeared to be a damaged civilian vessel. When they brought the survivors aboard, those survivors turned out to be our diplomatic team. But instead of taking hostages or sabotaging your ship, they did something we've found to be much more effective. Which was, they talked to your crew, Kethvar said quietly. Brother, these humans, they're not what our intelligence reports claimed. They don't hate us. They don't want to conquer us. They just want to be left alone to live their lives and raise their children. The screen changed again, showing images from inside the captured hegemony ship. But instead of human guards and hegemony prisoners, it showed something far more disturbing. Humans and hegemony crew members working together. A human engineer showing a hegemony technician more efficient ways to maintain plasma conduits. A hegemony warrior learning human martial arts techniques from a teenage girl who treated the deadly alien like a friendly sparring partner. They have something we've never encountered before, Kethvar continued. They call it cultural weaponization. They don't conquer their enemies. They make their enemies want to be like them. Torres smiled slightly. We've learned that most conflicts arise from misunderstanding and fear. When people actually talk to each other, share their stories, learn about each other's families and dreams, well, it becomes much harder to see each other as enemies. This is impossible, Thexkar protested. You're describing some kind of mind control, psychological manipulation. Not at all, Torres replied. We're describing conversation. You see, Warlord, while your military scientists were developing better weapons and stronger armor, our social scientists were studying something far more powerful. How to make friends with people who think they're supposed to be your enemies. The display changed once more, showing scenes from across human space. Hegemony citizens working in human factories. Human children playing with young aliens in integrated schools. Mixed crews operating trade vessels that cross species boundaries as if they didn't exist. This is what we've been building while you've been planning your conquests, Torres explained. Not an empire based on fear and domination, but a community based on mutual benefit and shared purpose. Every species that joins us becomes stronger. Every culture that merges with ours adds something valuable. Every former enemy becomes a friend who brings new perspectives and capabilities. Thexkar stared at the images, his tactical mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Everything in his experience told him this was impossible. Different species didn't cooperate, they competed. The strong dominated the weak. Winners took everything while losers were enslaved or destroyed. But the evidence before his eyes suggested otherwise. Sir, his tactical officer reported quietly, I'm detecting power fluctuations throughout the fleet. Some ships are requesting permission to open communication channels with the humans. Denied. Thexkar snapped. No one speaks to them without my direct authorization. But even as he gave the order, he could see the doubt in his officers' eyes. They had heard their sub-warlords speak with admiration about their captors. They had seen images of cooperation where they expected to find subjugation. They were beginning to ask themselves the most dangerous question any soldier can ask. What if we're the ones who are wrong? Admiral Torres watched the confusion spreading through the hegemony fleet with the satisfaction of someone whose strategy was proceeding exactly according to plan. The humans hadn't brought superior weapons to this engagement. They hadn't relied on numerical advantage or tactical brilliance. They had brought something far more powerful, the possibility of a different way of thinking about the universe. And once that possibility took root in someone's mind, it became almost impossible to eradicate. Warlord Thexkar, she said gently, your fleet is welcome to remain here as long as you need to consider your options. But I think you should know that this conversation is being broadcast throughout hegemony space. By now, billions of your people are learning that there are alternatives to conquest and domination. For the first time in his career, Thexkar realized that he had encountered an enemy against whom there was no defense. Hope. And hope, he was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous weapon in the human arsenal. The revolution began quietly, as most revolutions do, with a single question whispered in the dark spaces between the stars. On the hegemony heavy cruiser Eternal Conquest, Subcommander Yixtao found herself staring at the sealed communication logs from the human diplomatic team that had been transmitted throughout the fleet. The official order from Warlord Thexkar was clear. No one was to review the enemy propaganda. But, like many of her species' best tactical officers, Yixtao had learned that information was more valuable than orders when survival was at stake. The logs contained something she had never seen before. Personal messages from human civilians to their own military forces. Not strategic briefings or tactical assessments, but letters from families. A mother telling her daughter to be brave, but come home safe. A son promising his father that he would take care of the farm while the old man was away fighting. Grandparents recording bedtime stories for children they might never see again. Yixtao had been bred for war. Her genetic modifications included enhanced aggression, reduced empathy, and heightened territorial instincts. But as she listened to a human grandmother reading a story about a little rabbit who learned to share his garden with the animals who were eating his vegetables, she felt something stirring in her mind that her conditioning had tried to eliminate. She began to wonder what it would be like to fight for something other than conquest. The question spread like a virus through the fleet. In the engineering sections, technicians began discussing human industrial techniques they had observed in the broadcast feeds. In the weapons bays, gunners found themselves comparing their training with the casual competence they had seen in teenage human crews. In the command centers, officers began analyzing human tactical doctrines and realizing that everything they thought they knew about warfare might be incomplete. But the real breakdown in hegemony discipline came from an unexpected source, the fleet's own historical archives. Lieutenant Commander Zekhara, the Eternal Conquest's chief intelligence officer, had been ordered to analyze human weaknesses for exploitation. Instead, she found herself cross-referencing human military history with hegemony expansion records. What she discovered changed everything. In every system the hegemony had conquered, they had followed the same pattern. Identify the strongest military force, defeat it in battle, then subjugate the surviving population. It was efficient, predictable, and had worked for centuries. But as Zekhara studied the human colonies they had been ordered to attack, she realized something troubling. The humans weren't following standard defensive patterns. They weren't concentrating their forces to protect strategic objectives. They weren't even trying to preserve their military assets for a decisive battle. Instead, they were doing something the hegemony had never encountered. They were dispersing their entire population into defensive roles. By the void, she whispered as the implications became clear. They're not defending territory. They're defending an idea. She began pulling up additional records, comparing human expansion patterns with those of other species the hegemony had encountered. Most civilizations followed predictable models. Establish colonies, extract resources, expand territory, repeat. The strong conquered the weak, the advanced subjugated the primitive, the organized defeated the chaotic. But humans were different. They didn't just establish colonies. They created communities. They didn't extract resources. They developed sustainable systems. They didn't expand territory. They extended their culture. And their culture, Zekhara realized with growing alarm, was designed to turn enemies into friends. She accessed the restricted files containing records of first contact with other species the hegemony had eventually conquered. In every case, the initial meetings had followed similar patterns. Formal diplomatic protocols, careful negotiations, gradual escalation of tensions as incompatible interests became apparent, then war. But the human first contact records were completely different. Instead of formal diplomacy, they had sent families. Instead of negotiations, they had offered gifts. Instead of demonstrating their military power, They had shown how their children played and how their artists created beauty. "They're not a military species," she said aloud in her empty office. "They're a social species that happens to be very good at fighting when they have to." The realization that followed was even more disturbing. If the humans were primarily a social species, then engaging them in military conflict was exactly the wrong approach. It was like trying to defeat water by hitting it with a hammer. Zekara began to understand why Subwarlord Kethvar had sounded so shaken in his transmission. He hadn't been defeated by superior firepower or tactical brilliance. He had been defeated by kindergarten teachers who had shown him pictures of their students, by engineers who had asked him about his family, by ordinary people who had treated a deadly alien warrior like a neighbor they wanted to get to know. The humans had weaponized friendship itself. Her contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from a bridge. Commander Zekara to the war room immediately. She arrived to find Warlord Thexkar standing before the main tactical display, his 4 eyes reflecting an emotion she had never seen in him before: uncertainty. The display showed the hegemony fleet's current position, but something was wrong with the formation. "Sir," she said carefully. "Look at the display," he ordered. "Tell me what you see." Zekara studied the formation, her tactical training automatically analyzing the positioning. "Sir, I see our fleet maintaining defensive positions around the system periphery, with human forces controlling the inner system approaches." "Look closer." She enhanced the display, zooming in on individual ship positions. What she saw made her mandibles click with disbelief. 3 hegemony vessels were no longer in formation. They had drifted closer to the human lines, close enough that they were now within easy weapons range of human ships. But the humans weren't firing. Instead, both sets of ships appear to be talking. The Crimson Fong, the Void Hunter, and the Storm's Edge have established communication links with human vessels, Thexkar said quietly. "Their captains are claiming they're gathering intelligence, but..." He paused, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been despair. "I think they're asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that soldiers ask when they start wondering if there might be alternatives to fighting." Zekara felt something cold settle in her stomach. If hegemony ship commanders were actively seeking communication with the humans, then the fleet's discipline was breaking down. More importantly, it meant that human cultural tactics were working exactly as intended. "Sir," she said carefully, "I've been analyzing human strategic doctrine. I believe I understand what they're doing." "Explain." "They're not trying to defeat us, sir. They're trying to convert us." Thexkar turned his full attention to her, all 4 eyes focusing with predatory intensity. "Continue." "Human military doctrine isn't based on destruction of enemy forces. It's based on integration of enemy populations. They don't conquer, they assimilate. They don't destroy cultures, they absorb them. They're not fighting a war, sir. They're conducting a recruitment campaign." The implications hung in the air between them like a poison cloud. If Zekara was right, then every moment the hegemony fleet remained in this system, they were being exposed to human cultural influence. Every conversation between hegemony and human personnel was an opportunity for humans to demonstrate alternatives to the hegemony way of life. "Recommendations?" Thexkar asked quietly. "Sir, we have 3 options. We can attack immediately, accepting massive casualties, but preventing further cultural contamination. We can withdraw and report our findings to High Command, risking court-martial for failure to complete our mission. Or we can acknowledge that we're facing something the hegemony has never encountered before, and consider the possibility that the humans might be offering us something better than what we have." Silence filled the war room as both officers contemplated the unthinkable. The idea that the hegemony might be wrong about something fundamental to their existence was too large to fully grasp. It was Thexkar who finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "Commander, what would happen if every hegemony citizen had access to human culture? If they could see alternatives to conquest and domination?" Zekara met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I believe it would be the end of the hegemony as we know it. And the beginning of what? Something unprecedented in galactic history, sir. A true interstellar civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. Outside the war room's viewports, human and hegemony ships continued their careful dance of mutual discovery, while throughout the galaxy, the seeds of transformation began to sprout in places neither species had imagined possible. The age of conquest was ending. The age of community was about to begin. And it would start with a simple question that was spreading through both fleets like wildfire. What if there was a better way to live among the stars? 6 months after the standoff at Kepler 442b, the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The transformation hadn't happened through conquest or war, but through something far more revolutionary: conversation. The footage of hegemony and human crews working together had spread through quantum communication networks faster than any military intelligence service could contain it. On 1,000 worlds, in 100 different species, people began asking the same question. What if cooperation was stronger than conquest? Former warlord Thexkar, he had abandoned his military title 3 months ago, stood on the observation deck of the UES Harmony, watching the construction of something unprecedented in galactic history. The massive space station taking shape before him wasn't designed for war or defense. It was designed for something much more ambitious, bringing different species together to solve problems that none of them could handle alone. Hard to believe, isn't it? Admiral Torres said as she joined him at the viewport. The human woman looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had just completed a project that had taken everything she had to give. That we're working together? Thexkar asked, his universal translator rendering his clicking speech into perfect standard. Or that it's actually working? Both, Torres admitted with a smile. I'll confess, when we started this operation, I wasn't sure we could pull it off. Turning an invasion fleet into a diplomatic mission seemed optimistic even by human standards. Through the viewport, they watched as human engineers worked alongside hegemony construction crews to install quantum communication arrays that would connect the station to every inhabited world in the sector. Zephyrian technicians integrated their crystalline computing systems with Vorthack bioneural networks to create processing power beyond anything either species could achieve alone. Synthoid manufacturers provided precision equipment, while human designers contributed artistic sensibilities that transformed functional architecture into something beautiful. The others are asking how we did it, Thexkar said quietly. The Galactic Council wants to understand how humans managed to defeat the hegemony without firing a shot. Our former High Command is demanding explanations for how their most successful warlord became a community organizer. Torres laughed. We didn't defeat the hegemony. We offered you something better than victory, which was purpose. She gestured toward the construction site, where dozens of species were working together on projects that would have been impossible for any single civilization. Your people were good at conquest, Thexkar, but what were you conquering for? What was the point of all that expansion and domination? Thexkar considered the question, his 4 eyes reflecting the lights of the growing station. Power, resources, security for our people. And now he could see hegemony children attending integrated schools where they learned alongside the offspring of a dozen different species. He could see former warriors retraining as engineers, teachers, and doctors. He could see his brother, Kethvar, now calling himself an interspecies cooperation specialist, helping to design agricultural systems that would feed populations across multiple star systems. Now we're building something that will outlast any empire, he said finally. We're building a future where conquest is unnecessary because sharing is more profitable than taking. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been resistance from hegemony hardliners who couldn't accept that their entire worldview had been proven wrong. There had been human skeptics who worried that they were being naive about alien nature. There had been other species in the galaxy who viewed the human hegemony cooperation with suspicion and fear. But for every voice of resistance, there had been 10 voices of hope. Young hegemony who wanted to build rather than destroy. Human families who welcomed alien refugees from failed conquest campaigns. Scientists from across the galaxy who realized that cooperation could accelerate research by centuries. Admiral, Thexkar said carefully, I need to ask you something that's been bothering me. Go ahead. This wasn't improvised, was it? The way you handled our invasion, the cultural integration programs, the speed with which you've built these cooperative networks. You were planning this long before we arrived. Torres was quiet for a long moment, watching human and alien children play together in the station's recreational areas. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone revealing a carefully guarded secret. Thexkar, humanity has been preparing for this moment for over 2 centuries. Not the military engagement, the social transformation. We've been studying every species we've encountered, learning their cultures, understanding their motivations, figuring out how to build bridges instead of walls. You've been planning to convert the galaxy? We've been planning to give the galaxy a choice, she corrected. We learned something during our own development that most species never figure out. Diversity makes you stronger, but only if you can turn diversity into cooperation instead of competition. She activated a holographic display that showed the current state of human space. But instead of the traditional territorial boundaries that most species used, the display showed something unprecedented, a network of interconnected communities that spanned dozens of star systems and included representatives from every major galactic civilization. This is what we've been building, Torres explained. Not an empire, but a community. Not subjects, but partners. Every species that joins brings something unique to the whole. The hegemony brings military expertise and logistical coordination. The Zephyrians bring crystal technology and mathematical precision. The Vorthack contribute biological sciences and environmental management. The Synthoids provide manufacturing capabilities and computational power. And humans? Torres smiled. We bring the ability to make all those different strengths work together, with a social glue that holds it all together. The truth was even more extraordinary than Thexkar had imagined. Humanity hadn't defeated the hegemony through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. They had done something much more ambitious. They had created a template for post-scarcity civilization that was so appealing, so obviously superior to traditional models of competition and conquest that resistance became almost impossible. The other galactic powers are worried, Thexkar observed. The Dominion has begun mobilizing their fleets. The Empire is reinforcing border worlds. They think you're expanding too fast. Are we expanding? Torres asked. Or are people choosing to join something that offers them better lives? It was a fair question. In the 6 months since the Kepler 442b incident, over 30 previously independent star systems had requested integration into the human cooperative network, not through conquest or coercion, but through voluntary association. They had seen what cooperation could accomplish and decided they wanted to be part of it. The Council is calling it the human contagion, Thexkar said with amusement. They're treating cooperation like a disease that spreads from system to system. Maybe it is, Torres replied thoughtfully. Maybe the idea that people can work together instead of fighting each other is exactly the kind of contagion the galaxy needs. As if summoned by their conversation, a new arrival interrupted their contemplation. Commander Sarah Chun, now serving as the Cooperative Network's chief diplomatic officer, approached with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested important news. Admiral, we've received a response to our latest invitation, she reported. The Stellar Confederacy has agreed to send observers to next month's integration conference. Torres raised her eyebrows. The Confederacy? That's significant. They've been the most resistant to our overtures. What changed their minds? Thexkar asked. Chin smiled. A grain shortage on their primary agricultural worlds. They need our help, and they've finally realized that pride is less filling than bread. It was a perfect example of how the cooperative network had been growing, not through military pressure or political manipulation, but through practical demonstration that cooperation solved problems more effectively than competition. When the Confederacy's farming worlds faced crop failures, the network had offered assistance without demanding political concessions or territorial rights. They had simply helped because helping was what the network did. And now the Confederacy was beginning to understand that joining the network might be more beneficial than opposing it. How many does that make? Torres asked. 87 star systems in full cooperation, with another 43 in various stages of integration, Chen reported. At current rates, we'll have a significant percentage of the galaxy's population within our cooperative framework within the next 5 years. Without firing a shot, Thexcarm mused. You're conquering the galaxy through friendship. We're not conquering anything, Torres corrected gently. We're just showing people that there's an alternative to the way things have always been done. Once they see the alternative, they choose for themselves. Through the viewport, the massive cooperation station continued to grow. Soon it would be complete, and representatives from across the galaxy would come to learn how species that had been enemies for centuries were working together to solve problems that had seemed impossible. The age of conquest was ending not with a bang, but with the quiet realization that conquest had never been necessary in the first place. The galaxy was finally learning what humans had discovered long ago. The strongest weapon in the universe wasn't a gun or a bomb or a fleet of warships. It was the simple recognition that everyone was stronger when everyone worked together. And once that recognition took hold, it spread like wildfire across the stars, transforming enemies into friends, competitors into collaborators, and a galaxy divided by conflict into a community united by hope. The cosmos had finally recognized what a human battle army really was, not an instrument of war, but an engine of transformation that could turn the entire universe into something better than it had ever been before. The lesson was complete. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, as Admiral Torres watched children from a dozen different worlds play together in the light of foreign stars, was exactly what humanity had been hoping for all along.